This is the 83rd episode of the Effective Executive podcast and YouTube channel. And this week I've called this episode Overcome the Chains of Control. And yeah, there's a lot going on in organizations, especially with people leaving, uh, the mass exodus that we see from companies, making it very difficult to hire new people as well as keep the ones that you have. Um, and one of the things that will help force people out of your organization is over control. Now, back in episode 27, I talked about centralization versus decentralization. I've talked about micromanagement. I've talked about reward systems and appraisals and rules, processes, scripts, and things of that sort that are put on employees that are really their chains to of control. The people want to control what employees say to customers and do with customers, those types of things. And yet, customer service to me has, uh, I mean, it's fallen off a cliff. It's gotten so much worse, and some of it's labor shortage, and I understand that, and some of it's just over control from organizations that causes these people to leave and also causes you to get really poor service. So let's just kind of walk through some of these things. You can go deeper. Episode 27, centralization versus decentralization. You know, uh, when you call into a contact center, for instance, as a customer, you expect whoever you're talking to be able to solve your problem. And the problem that you run into in organizations is everybody centralized things. Oh, well, I can't do that because the tech does that if you're calling a cable company, or billing handles that piece. All I can do is write up something. And so we've built these systems, we've built these organizations that are incapable of delivering good service in organizations. And centralization has a lot to do with this. And it's built off of a false thesis that really plays itself out. Everybody talks about economies of scale. If we put all the billing people in one area and we do this type of thing, but if you have to navigate that as a customer who's expecting one person to be able to deliver an end-to-end service for them, you just put up more barriers in organizations, and it makes it very difficult to get the value you're looking for as a customer out of an organization. And so this whole concept of centralized control and economies of scale and things of that sort are really a myth from my perspective. As I go into organizations, I see if you spend time in a contact center listening to customers, you'll pretty quickly understand what isn't working in your organization. Obviously, smaller organizations don't have as many of these difficulties, but then they try to be, once they hit that 150 employee barrier, then all of a sudden, control. I got to control what we're saying, and because we don't have the people with the knowledge of billing and being a tech and answering phone calls and things of that sort, and it just everybody does the same thing, and it's awful. And the thing is it's like a gold mine when I look at it, because organizations, if they just shift their thinking about what they're doing and centralizing things, they'll realize that instead of economies of scale, they're getting diseconomies of scale. They're making things worse, and they're making their system perform very poorly from a customer perspective. And so um, that's, in essence, we hear about shared services and all this thinking is based in economies of scale and centralized portions, and government is pushing this way too. We're getting more government, more centralized control, but nobody control in a country. no group of people is smart enough to be able to control every aspect of an economy, uh, of a government. It just can't happen. And that's why you need less of it, the decentralization. Uh, but regardless, I wanted to make the point about centralization and economies of scale and the myths associated with those. The second thing is micromanagement, and when you can't get people to do things or whatever, there's this perception at a minimum, and usually it is a function of um, managers just, well, they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, and so then you get this micromanagement component. And you got to realize that micromanagement, the biggest complaint I hear from employees is, my manager, is hawking me all the time about something. Um, and so micromanagement is one of those things that it's a chain of control that will drive your employees nuts. The third thing is reward systems and appraisals. I mean, again, chain of control. We're going to appraise you, how you do. Oh, it's supposed to be good feedback and all these types of things. But let's face it, appraisals are a way to control what you want a particular employee to do. And then you do these reward systems on top of it to make sure that they're doing things. And people are becoming very different about these reward systems. Sure, they want the money and they'll comply, but you're not getting the buy-in that you need in order to keep employees. The fourth thing I wrote down was rules and processes and scripts and things of that sort are all forms of over control. And I'm not saying you don't need some of these things. You got to train to something when a new person's coming on and those types of things. But see lots of rules and that employees have to adhere to. And some of them make sense and some of them don't. And when you question them, well, that's just the rule. You got to follow it. People want to understand what those rules are there for and who developed them and why. Because a lot of them are typically either outdated or they're things that were put into place for one incident that happened one time 50 years ago. And then scripts. When a customer calls in, the scripts in a contact center, for instance, never match what the contact center agent gets. A contact center agent gets a variety of calls that don't fit every script. And I've talked about this before, but scripts, when somebody calls in, I've seen organizations, especially government loves this stuff. 200 different scripts that we have. Oh, wow. 200 different scripts. That's really cool. And we train them on it and we got to make sure that they follow those scripts. And some of them are actually read. They read the scripts. And it's just awful. Because the expectation is, oh, well, this is the type of call they get. Here's the script for that particular call. It sounds all neat and tidy, but it's never that way. Because the calls that you get have a little element of script number 2 and a little bit element of script 89 and a little element of script 50 and a little element of script 99 or 199 and so it goes, and they become a chain of control. So those are 4 things that I'm seeing, I experience, I hear about. And all 4 of these things, centralization, micromanagement, reward systems, appraisals, rules, process, scripts, all cost tons of money and never deliver on what the expense of what it is that they're supposed to achieve. And so, so much time and money is spent developing these over-controlled systems. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I approach this. Is first of all, there has to be this understanding of what the organization is about. So its purpose or aim, and so development of that has to be clear to everyone in the organization. And by listening to a customer, no matter whether you're in manufacturing or service or whatever, the feedback that you get has to be absorbed and understand that you need to design a system that can deliver the value associated with that your particular service or manufacturing product. And I have developed a system around what I call customer creed. So once we have a really good understanding of what our aim is, what our purpose is of the organization, and then you can move on to developing this customer creed after you've listened to phone calls and interactions with customers and things of that sort. Now you have knowledge to be able to develop a customer creed. And so what is that customer creed? It's principles for your employees to adhere to, as opposed to some of these other things that we get involved with. We have conversations about what the principle associated with handling a particular phone call in a particular way. If the contact center agents all agree that they need some rules or scripts or those types of things, that's fine. I get it. But what do you do when you're in those gray areas? And that's where the micromanagement comes in, right? Because that's a little grayer, and then management's got to have its say, and then the agent doesn't have any control, and these are more the chains of control. So working to principles that you develop is really, in essence, the customer creed of developing these principles so that when a contact center agent or anybody really in your organization comes across a problem, they understand what principle that they're working to. And sometimes these principles have to be adjusted over time. But the people who need to be adjusting them aren't management. Management really has, in my system, has the job of clearing out all of the barriers associated with delivering the service that's out there and looking forward to things like innovation and having systems in place, methods in place to be able to achieve that. So the principles is something to overcome this. People working to principles that understand what their purpose and aim are much better equipped to create value for customers. And then you, as I said, the barriers that many management folks are removing are, well, accounting says we can't get into their billing system, and the techs say, well, you don't really need to know that, and they have a different system for scheduling. And then the person who's receiving the call cannot deliver an end-to-end service congruent with their expectations. And so developing those things, developing the aim and the purpose, developing your customer creed, as I call it in my system, those principles that you're living to will help in the gray areas and get rid of things like centralization and micromanagement, reward systems and appraisals and rules and processes and scripts. They're all done by, developed by the employees that have to interact with customers on a daily basis. And now you have a system that people want to work in, as opposed to feeling like you have the, please arrest me, put the chains of control on me. Who wants that? Who wants to live that way? Nobody. And they're going to leave your organization. So that's what I wanted to discuss this week. I'll catch you next week.